So let's talk about the #1 mistake in content. It's focusing on quantity. But what if the secret to achieving massive scale is creating content that you only have to produce once, turning it into a perpetual asset? Today, we are diving into a blueprint that completely rethinks content strategy. We're going to step off that endless, exhausting content treadmill and build something way more powerful and a lot more profitable. Perpetual assets that actually grow in value over time.
This quote right here really frames the great paradox of online growth, doesn't it? For years, the wisdom has been all about content velocity. Just how fast can we publish stuff? But honestly, that idea is an illusion. It's a hamster wheel that blinds us to a much more critical truth. True, scalable growth is achieved by building assets, not just creating disposable content. Think of it like real estate. You don't build a house just for a weekend party, right? You build it to appreciate and value over decades. This system treats your content just like that, a long-term investment. One designed to fundamentally change the economics of your business by continuously and predictably lowering your customer acquisition costs.
So before we can build this new system, we really have to diagnose the problem with the old one. We need to understand what I call the quantity trap. This is that cycle of creating disposable, short-term content that feels super productive in the moment. I mean, you're shipping, you're posting, but it's ultimately a losing game. It just leads to audience fatigue and, let's be real, creative burnout. Let's break down why that is. Okay, at the heart of this whole problem is a crisis that's facing pretty much every business out there: the relentless rise of customer acquisition costs, or CAC. That's the total cost of all your sales and marketing just to get a single customer. You know it. Paid ad channels are more competitive and more expensive than ever. This puts this immense pressure on finding sustainable, organic ways to grow. And that old model, running a campaign, seeing a temporary spike in traffic, and then watching it just vanish back to zero, that's just not going to cut it anymore. Today's world demands content that works for you not just for a week, but for years. This pressure is exactly what forced the shift towards a new framework, one centered on building what we call high-authority assets. This slide just lays out the two opposing philosophies so clearly. Over on the left, you've got the content treadmill. This is the world of disposable campaigns. They demand enormous creative effort week after week for returns that always inevitably diminish. You're just constantly chasing the next idea, the next post, the next video. It's a total recipe for burnout. But on the right, you have the alternative, building evergreen assets. Now, this requires a higher initial investment for sure, but the returns, they compound over time. Instead of constantly creating from scratch, you have a system for repurposing that generates sustainable value. The choice is pretty stark, right? Constant output or compounding returns.
So we've identified the trap. Now let's get into the mechanics of the escape route. We're going to pop open the hood on what's called the Evergreen architecture. This is the engine that is specifically designed to power sustainable, long-term growth by turning your content from an expense into an appreciating asset.
The foundation of this entire engine is a structure known as the pillar/cluster model. Now, this isn't just a content idea, it is a deliberate architecture. It's a way of organizing information that signals to both search engines and, actual human beings that you are an undeniable, comprehensive authority on a specific topic. It creates this whole ecosystem of knowledge, not just a series of disconnected posts.
And this diagram shows you exactly how it works. See, it all starts with the pillar, that central column. This is your cornerstone, a single massive, incredibly comprehensive piece of content, often over 3,000 words long. It's the definitive guide. Think of it as the sun in your content solar system. Then orbiting that sun, you have the clusters. These are dozens of smaller, bite-sized assets. The social media posts, email sequences, video scripts, and infographics. But here is the absolute key. They aren't brand new content. They are all derived, repurposed, and broken down directly from that one main pillar, with each one linking back and driving traffic to that core asset.
So let's trace the flow of this mechanism. It's a very deliberate three-step process. First, you make that high investment play and you create the evergreen pillar, optimizing it for authority and completeness. Second, you activate what's called the repurposing waterfall. This is a system, not just a random act of creativity, where that one pillar is methodically broken down into dozens of smaller cluster pieces. This is what solves the volume problem without that constant creative cost. And finally, you have Evergreen Promotion. This makes sure that the pillar and its clusters maintain maximum visibility over the long term, which steadily reduces your reliance on expensive paid campaigns. It's really a beautiful, self-fueling loop.
But look, this isn't just about clever SEO or content organization. A system designed for this kind of scale works because it systematically taps into some fundamental principles of human behavior, specifically our deep-seated need for authority and certainty. So let's look at the psychology that makes this engine so darn powerful.
The primary psychological mechanism at play here is what's known as source credibility. Search engines like Google have a framework for this called EEAT, which stands for expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. They basically developed this because of the flood of low-quality information out there as a way to algorithmically identify and reward reliable sources. But really, this is just an algorithm trying to replicate human judgment. When we're faced with a complex problem, our brains instinctively search for the safest, most credible source. A massive, comprehensive pillar asset is undeniable proof of deep expertise. It isn't just telling people you're an authority, it is demonstrating it in an overwhelming way.
The system also brilliantly leverages the principle of reciprocity. This is a powerful psychological trigger where we feel this natural urge to repay a perceived debt. Just think about it. When a brand provides a massive, comprehensive asset, like a 3,000-word definitive guide, completely for free, it establishes this powerful psychological credit with you, the user. And that user feels compelled to repay that act of generosity, whether it's by sharing the content, signing up for a newsletter, or eventually becoming a customer. This is how you pull people toward your brand instead of constantly pushing your message on them.
Okay, so we've covered the what and the why. Now for the most important part, the how. Let's translate all these insights into a clear, actionable 3-step framework you can use to start building your own content asset engine starting today.
All right, let's walk through these 3 steps to mastery. First, you absolutely must anchor in evergreen value. This requires a new level of discipline. It means ruthlessly cutting out content that's focused on fleeting trends and focusing only on foundational topics that have a lifespan of at least 2 to 3 years. You're building long-term assets, not disposable campaigns. Second, you have to engineer the pillar/cluster structure, and I use the word engineer on purpose. This is an act of architectural planning, not just writing. You are strategically organizing your content to guarantee you dominate your niche organically. And finally, you have to systemize the repurposing workflow. This needs to become a mandatory, non-negotiable process. Every single pillar you create is automatically atomized or broken down into a fixed number of formats, like 10 social posts, 3 email snippets, and 1 video script. This is the secret to getting both consistency and velocity without burning out your entire team. And all this brings us to the ultimate goal. The whole point of this architecture is to achieve a profound business transformation. It's about shifting your content department from a cost center, a part of the business that just spends money, into a self-sustaining acquisition engine that is constantly working to reduce your reliance on those expensive, unpredictable paid channels. This is how content becomes one of the most profitable investments your business can make.
So the crucial point, the final insight to take away from all this, is that true scale and longevity are achieved through architecture, not just creative speed. It is the cold, hard logic of system building applied to our very human need for reliable authority. This system works because it recognizes that the most profitable form of growth is the kind you only have to pay for once. The best marketing doesn't push people through a funnel, it pulls them toward value because it builds trust, and that's an asset that lasts forever.